So we just looked at blind hijacking, where the attacker going to exploit the predictability of a sequence number to take on a connection that already exists between a victim and a host. So let's now move on and talk about a man in the middle session sniffing attack. And of course, when we talk about a man in the middle, we are going to talk about an attacker getting into a midst of the communication between the victim and the target machine. So let's take this for an example. We have got our victim in our machine and they are communicating backward and forward with all the usual sequences and acknowledgement numbers. The attacker then comes into the picture and reroute the packets. Now, how do they do this? Well, one option would be the forge ICMP packages and the internet control message protocol, which would give them the ability to redirect the traffic between the client and the host such that a pass through the attacker machine question like app spoofing, so app is exploding, and the address resolution protocol such as app tables and modified via the app reply, and the victim traffic is sent by the host. Now those would both be attacks where they simply all exist on the same network, and of course there are also physical interception and on the connection on the wire as well. Either way, the attacker gets in here and modifies the existing connection to reroute through them. They are now effectively a man in the middle and they can sniff the traffic, which include the contents of those TCP packets. So in many ways, not the different to session hijacking right up to the application level. So that's the man in the middle session sniffing. Let's look more on more the TCP level session hijacking attack, and that's the IP spoofing. So types of man in the middle session attacks. Specific types of man in the middle session attacks include the rough access point attacks, ARP spoofing and DNS spoofing. So rough access point is the wireless device generally attempts to connect to the wireless access point with the strongest signal, which is automatically. During a rough access point, an attacker creates an access point in an attempt to loot the nearby devices into connecting it. These types of man in the middle session attack is effective because it only requires a physical proximity to the target. ARP spoofing. ARP spoofing is the address resolution protocol, which allow the discovery of the media access control like as short MAC with each IP address in a local network like as a LAN. When one host needs to communicate with another host with a given IP address, it must first reference the ARP cache to resolve the IP address to a MAC address. An attacker performing a ARP spoofing responds to this request with its own MAC address. So by intercepting traffic to legitimate user or services, an attacker can gain access to information like session token that allow them to hijack the session. And the final one is DNS spoofing. DNS spoofing, aka DNS cache poisoning, is conceptually similar to like MDNS spoofing, although it's typically more challenging to execute. The attacker must prove the target host and with false information with the intention of poisoning the host's DNS cache. The poison cache will cause the target to access the attacker host rather than the legitimate host. Then the victim of a DNS spoofing attack may then provide sensitive information under the assumption that it's communicating with the trusted host. and prevent man in the middle attack. So having a strong encryption mechanism on wireless access point prevents unwanted user from joining your network just by being nearby. A weak encryption mechanism can allow an attacker to brute force his way into a network and begin the man in the middle attack. And the stronger the encryption implementation is, it is the safer. It's essential to make sure that your default router login is changed, not just your Wi-Fi password but your router login credential. If an attacker finds your router login credential, they can change your DNS server to their malicious server, or even worse, infect your router with malicious software. And VPN can be used to create a secure environment for sensitive information within a local area network. The key is to use the key-based encryption to create a subnet for secure communication. This way, even if an attacker happens to get on a network that is shared, he will not be able to decipher the traffic in the VPN. And the final one is force HTTPS. So HTTPS can be used to securely communicate over HTTP using the public-private key exchange. This prevents an attacker from having any use of the data he may be sniffing, and website should only use HTTPS and not provide HTTP alternatives. User can install browser plugins to enforce using HTTPS on request. So let's summarize this. And the first thing, which I have made pretty clear quite a few times, that in terms of TCP level hijacking, this risk has been significantly mitigated. All of this talk around predictable sequence number is a risk that goes back to not just the 90s but all the way back to the 80s in the operating systems that did have a predictable numbers and have since been significantly mitigated. And the style of attack is now a very small part of the overall session. So hijacking risk in network and application. Now having said that, if we can get an attacker in the middle of encryption traffic, there is still going to be a risk. So we looked at a man in the middle session sniffing before, and clearly if someone can interrupt all these packets and getting themselves into the middle of a network, then yes, this is still going to be a risk. This is why having encryption, and this is why things like HTTPS is important. We are going to look at more in the next module. And finally, we looked at a man in the browser attack. For attacking and compromising a host machine is still a very serious risk. So if an attack can exploit vulnerabilities in safe plugins and executed drive-by downloads such as host or the browser becomes compromised, then they can do some serious damage. It's a very difficult class of risk though. You cannot protect against that inner web application, which is very difficult to protect against, and that the TCP it lives alone, which is the level. But a man in the browser attack is something that still comes up a lot when the session hijacking is talked about. So it was important that we covered it here. So that's the networking client and the networking client level session and the session level hijacking. So let's now move on and have a look at actually mitigating the risk of session hijacking, because as usual, as it is to be the identify all the vulnerabilities that we have looked across. So finally I can say this is a really important thing, which is being able to protect against those risks. So I think I covered all the basic and the media, all the topics in this man in the medial session attack. So thank you.